Kamala Harris has announced that she will not run for California governor in 2026. This has fueled speculation as to whether she will run for president again in 2028. And in this video, we'll take a look at whether or not she'll even be able to win the Democratic primary and how she would fare in a potential matchup against Republican frontrunner J.D. Vance. According to the latest Democratic primary polling averages, Kamala Harris is in the lead at 21%. She is followed closely by Biden's Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, the current governor of California Gavin Newsom, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And looking at the polls, things do seem to look good for Kamala Harris, but one thing you have to remember is that the only reason she is the frontrunner is because she was the party's nominee in 2020 and the former vice president. It is simply her name recognition that is keeping her at the top. If there was a real primary race, I do expect her numbers to drop. She is not the best campaigner, and we have obviously seen that in both 2019 and 2024. Now, on the Republican side, J.D. Vance has an even larger lead. He's at 49.1%. There's no doubt that he is the clear frontrunner on the Republican side. Donald Trump Jr. is in second at just 11%. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, at 10.7%. And Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, comes in at number 4. And so coming back to the map, we're going to start off by filling in the solid states for both candidates. Kamala Harris as the presumptive Democratic nominee for this scenario. Republicans will, of course, very likely nominate J.D. Vance. And so we'll begin with the solid blue states that Kamala Harris is going to win easily by margins of 15 percentage points or more. And so we'll begin on the West Coast, where she will take Washington and California. She will also win in Hawaii, as well as Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. And then she will also take the 1st District of Maine, along with Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. This will give her 101 electoral votes. And as for the vice president, J.D. Vance will easily win in Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, and Florida. This gives the vice president 201 electoral votes. And so with just the solid states filled in, J.D. Vance has already taken a 100 electoral vote lead over the former vice president. And before we get to the likely states, I want to take a look at a poll that was released a few weeks ago between J.D. Vance and 3 of the top Democratic contenders. Now, Kamala Harris was not polled here, but this poll was conducted by Emerson College, which is one of the top pollsters, and it shows J.D. Vance defeating Pete Buttigieg by 1%, AOC by 3%, and Gavin Newsom also by 3%. It looks like, at least now, that J.D. Vance is a strong Republican candidate and will likely be able to deliver Republicans their 2nd presidential win in a row. And coming back to the map, we're now going to fill in the likely states for both candidates, states that are going to go to Harris or Vance by margins of 5 to 15 points. These states are going to be a little bit more competitive than the solid ones, but one candidate still has a pretty clear advantage. And so starting off with the likely states for the former vice president, we have Oregon and Colorado. We also have Illinois and New York. These 2 states are ones where the vice president significantly underperformed in 2024. She won Illinois by 11 points, in New York by just over 12, when Joe Biden, just 4 years prior, won Illinois by 17 and New York by 23. Many traditionally solid blue states became likely in the last election, and I don't expect things to change too much for the former vice president if she does decide to run again. We also have Connecticut and Rhode Island, and so this will give Kamala Harris 177 electoral votes. One of the biggest problems for Harris and the Democrats right now is just how unpopular as a party they are. The Democratic Party right now does not have a leader following Kamala Harris's loss, Joe Biden being literally 82 years old. The Democratic Party does not have anyone to lead them, and that is one of the main reasons why their net favorability currently sits at negative 23. Just 36% of the American electorate has a favorable view of the Democratic Party. 60% view them unfavorably. Many of these are, of course, Republicans, but also independents and left-leaning progressives, people that are even on the left of the Democratic Party. They do not approve of the party. As for the Republicans, things are looking a little better here. Their net approval is negative 12. 54% of the country view them unfavorably, but 42% do view them favorably. And that is a big advantage for J.D. Vance going into the next election. And so we're now going to fill in the likely red states. These are races that Vance is going to easily win. And many of these used to be incredibly competitive. I mean, just look at Ohio, a state that was a swing state back in 2008 and 2012. Barack Obama carried it by 3 points just 13 years ago. However, in 2016, Trump flipped the Buckeye state, winning it by 8. He then won it by the same margin in 2020, and then increased that margin all the way up to 11 in 2024. I see J.D. Vance winning Ohio again. This is actually his home state. I don't have him winning by 15 points or more specifically, but I definitely have him winning Ohio by a double-digit margin. We also have North Carolina. I mean, this was one of the 7 battlegrounds from 2024. It is the only state out of the 7 that Trump carried in all 3 elections. In 2016, he won it by 3.7. In 2020, he won it by 1.3. And in 2024, Trump carried the Tar Heel state by 3.2. With J.D. Vance on the ballot and North Carolina continuing to shift back towards the right, I have it in the likely red column, with J.D. Vance carrying it by just over 5 points. We also have the 2nd District of Maine, which has been pretty reliably Republican for the last few election cycles, and Arizona. This was a big surprise in 2024, as in 2020, Joe Biden carried Arizona by 0.3%. It was the first win for a Democrat here going back to 1996, but just 4 years later, with Kamala Harris at the top of the Democratic ticket, she loses it by 5.5%. This was a surprisingly large margin, and I can definitely see J.D. Vance continuing the GOP streak of winning Arizona by at least 5 points. And so with all of these solid and likely states now filled in for both candidates, I have the vice president at 246 electoral votes and the former vice president at 177. And so with 115 electoral votes outstanding, before we get to the lean states, I wanted to revisit the Democratic primary polling, where, of course, Harris sits at the top with 21%. But compare this to where Joe Biden was before 2020, when he was, at the time, the former vice president. He was at 30% before he announced and shot all the way up to over 40% after he announced his candidacy. And so Joe Biden was performing a lot better than Harris is today. And we also do see Harris on this graph. She ended her campaign in December of 2019, and at that time, she was polling at just 3.5 points. I mean, Michael Bloomberg, Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar all went further than the former vice president. Kamala Harris is not at all a shoo-in for the Democratic nomination, not like J.D. Vance is on the Republican side. And so I would not be surprised at all if any of these other top candidates were to unseat her at the top before she even announces her campaign, as people forget more and more about 2024. But for right now, she is the front runner, and typically when we see candidates that lose run again, like we saw with Adlai Stevenson in the 60s, they typically do not perform too well. And so many Republicans right now are gunning for Kamala Harris to be the nominee, because they know that she is probably not going to improve by very much at all, or maybe even do worse than she did last time. And so coming back to the map, we'll fill in the lean states first for Kamala Harris. States she's going to win by 1 to 5 percentage points. And we'll begin in the Northeast, where we have a very contentious Senate election next year, but on the presidential level, Maine still does lean towards the Democrats, and Kamala Harris will likely win its 2 at-large votes. We also have the Garden State of New Jersey. Joe Biden carried it by 16 points in 2020, Kamala Harris won it by just 5 in 2024. We also have neighboring Virginia, another state where Kamala Harris's performance was significantly worse than Joe Biden's. Biden carried Virginia by 10 points. Harris won it by just 5. And finally, we have New Mexico and its 5 electoral votes. And so this will give Kamala Harris 211. She is still 59 away from clinching the presidency. And moving on now to the lean states for JD Vance, we'll begin out west with Nevada. This is the only state that Trump won in 2024 that he did not win back in 2016. Nevada hasn't gone Republican since 2004, and this was a big win for Republicans. They won the governorship in 2022. They won the presidency in Nevada in 2024. They will likely also win it again in 2028. And so Nevada will be the first lean state for JD Vance. The second one will be the peach state of Georgia, 16 electoral votes, another state that Biden won in 2020, this time by a quarter of a percentage point. It's a state that Democrats hadn't won prior to this since 1992. And so Georgia shifted back into the Republican column in 2024. Trump carried it by 2.2. I can certainly see JD Vance winning Georgia for a second time. He, of course, won it as vice president in 2024. And so the peach state will be the second lean Republican state for the vice president. And then moving up to the Midwest, I mean, all three of these states like to vote as a pack. The last time that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania didn't all vote for the same presidential candidate, you would have to go all the way back to 1988 when Michael Dukakis won Wisconsin and lost the other two. Ever since then, all three of these upper Midwestern states has voted for the same presidential candidate in every election since. They all flipped for Trump in 2016. This is how he won the election over Hillary Clinton. They all flipped back for Joe Biden. This is how he defeated Trump. And then in 2024, Trump won all of them back again, Wisconsin by 0.86, Michigan by 1.4, and Pennsylvania by 1.7. Republicans also won the Senate election in Pennsylvania, unseating a Democratic incumbent, and came very, very close in both Wisconsin and Michigan. And so in 2028, I have JD Vance winning all three of these states by lean margins, at least 1 to 3 points. Wisconsin will probably be the most competitive, Michigan as well, but Pennsylvania is probably where he'll perform the best. And so JD Vance is now at 312 electoral votes, the exact same number that Trump was at following 2024. And Kamala Harris, if she is the nominee again, I do expect her to perform even worse. Generally, when presidential candidates lose and are renominated in the next election, they almost always lose again, and they almost always do even worse. Two big exceptions to this rule are Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland, the two presidents that served non-consecutive terms. And so I can see JD Vance expanding the map for Republicans, starting off in Minnesota, 10 electoral votes. Kamala Harris won the state by just 4 points, and this was with Tim Walz as her running mate. Walz was Minnesota's literal governor, and with JD Vance's ties to the Midwest, I can see him flipping Minnesota. I can also see him winning New Hampshire, a state that Trump lost by just 2 points against Kamala Harris, losing it by 2.8. In 2016, he actually came within half a percentage point of flipping it against Hillary Clinton. New Hampshire is a relatively purple state. It does have a Democratic lean, but there's no doubt that Republicans can win there if they perform exceptionally well. And the final thing to fill in on this map is Nebraska's 2nd district, which I do have Kamala Harris winning by a very narrow margin. And so this is my updated 2028 electoral map prediction. Vice President JD Vance wins with 326 electoral votes against former Vice President Kamala Harris at just 212. Like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below whether or not you think Kamala Harris will run. Do you think she'll actually be the nominee? And do you think that she can actually win if she does get the Democratic nod for a second time in a row? Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.